Hey associates! In this mini lecture video, I'm going to show you all the steps from the most challenging research project I've ever completed, so far anyway, my dissertation.
Wow!
And side note, a dissertation is usually the final step in most PhD programs, certainly mine from Colorado State University, where you spend literal years researching one topic, finding the story in that data, and then writing up a very formal technical report about it. We are going to walk through the materials from idea to proposal to data collection and ending with the final report, just as a practical introduction to the research process, specifically for communication and social science. It is the same, but obviously different than what you might see or have practiced in chem, bio, and engineering labs. We all use the scientific method and focus on rigor, validity, reliability, and transparency so the work can be reviewed as an appropriate contribution to knowledge. But of course, our questions, specific methods, and goals differ. So while you listen to this process and story, try taking notes on the similarities and differences from what you've practiced with research before. So I'm going to hop into my dissertation files so we can talk about the research project, process, and data collection through this example. Notice how many files and related documents I have in my folder. And yes, I would recommend and tell my younger self to clean up this folder with better file management. It's terrible.
Wow!
When you work on really big projects, it's definitely better to go into it with a clear system and naming convention in mind, especially if it's a team project. But since this was a solo adventure, I dealt with it and could only blame myself for the chaos. But in this file, I created summaries, various draft versions, excerpts of certain chapters my advisor wanted to look back over, and a million backups. Just in case, did not want to lose this work. I did have to do a formal presentation to my committee to defend my proposal. Basically, they read my full written proposal and then listened to me present the idea. They asked me questions to make sure I fully understood and had really thought through my plan. After that, they gave me guidance and suggestions for the revisions. And then I was off on my own to complete the plan that I had proposed. So I am inside of that kind of initial proposal. And this is actually what I kind of called the summary proposal. And so it was just a place for me to get all my big ideas down. You can see it is only 22 pages, which I know sounds like a lot, but like it's really not.
Wow!
I have my kind of summary of just like, okay, here's what I was sort of thinking. And I needed to get enough of it down, including some of these early citations to basically send to my advisor, be like, could this idea work to begin with? Here's kind of a direction for the questions I'm thinking. Here's sort of the method I'm pondering. And then, or they wanted to see, is there enough, kind of existing content research theory for me to move forward? So I did take then this 22-page document and turned it into my full actual proposal. And of course, my committee received a PDF copy. I'm opening the Word doc of all of these so we can just navigate and see a few production things easier. You can see I did this proposal in 2020, so the fall. So my whole research project actually had to be rethought of. You can see I have an important research context here about the pandemic because I had to kind of pivot on what it meant for my research, given that obviously movie production and theater going and just kind of our entire culture and state of being was
chaos.
But within the proposal stage, I really want to focus on explaining that process for background, literature, what we call the literature review, which is really going through and trying to, synthesize across what people are saying in these different areas, what is kind of the history, and the factors that are related and important to set up the overall kind of question and problem. So for my background and literature section, Obviously we start with a nice introduction, including purpose statement for the chapter and the section. Work this big, right? We know readers are skip, scan, skimming. And so every chapter we have to kind of write it in a way and assume that they maybe skipped over the introduction. So we have to give them, right? Here's kind of the quick background of what we're doing, why I'm doing it, and sort of a paragraph. And then here is my purpose statement, and we'll see that in every section. Then I talked about, right, a brief history of podcast and film production, just setting up like, here's what podcasts are and why they were studying, and here's how they developed and were created in the past. So in this whole section is much more of that research through just like describing and understanding what's going on in a given situation. Notice how many different sources I'm pulling together, making sure not to just cite the exact same thing over and over again, right? So for example, it's like, okay, Sterling, Salvetti, Pew Research, Ryan, Whole Cats, like this one paragraph that's talking about basically what is a podcast and how it, combines these elements, has 5 sources that I, connected together to kind of show that history. Let me get this. Pause. So when I am thinking about kind of that literature review, what I like to do is, right, think of sort of a diagram with the big kind of topics, right? And your research project, right, happens right there in the middle. So what do I need to understand in my background in literature to sort of get to where my research project lives, right? So for me, it's of course things like podcast, then we have film. And then I also kind of talked a lot about sort of culture and community. And so these are the 3 spheres that are overlapping to really show how and why my research project exists and kind of what I'm bringing together and combining to kind of find those insights. So as you're starting to outline and brainstorm your own research projects, try giving yourself a little Venn diagram, right? Technical visual, so you can kind of understand what history, background, development, and context is important for building up your understanding of your own research and work. And then, of course, when you write it, it helps other people understand your research and your work. Then we get to my actual research questions. So I have my kind of introduction, big picture, what am I investigating? Audio and critics engage with film through these discursive activities, social relations, and community technologies that expand the genres and purpose of criticism. That's my kind of big picture reason and purpose. And then I have these very specific questions. Then into the method section, it's just where I'm explaining exactly what it is I wanted to do in this project, outlining exactly what my sample is going to be, justifying why I picked them as a sample, and kind of relating it to right at these theoretical roots. So it's like, I picked the sample not randomly, also not in a biased way. It's like, this is a reason why these kind of 5 types of podcasts actually represent sort of a breadth of the types of film critics we would expect to see, so I can start to make those connections. And then we get into things like the data collection, explaining, right, how long am I going to do it? What am I going to be doing? I even made a little visual of what my notes were going to look like, so they knew I had a plan for that. The types of data that I was going to do with like kind of clear descriptions for everything. And really here at this stage, what's important to like connect and remember from our past units and what you've already learned in this class is technical descriptions. Really, my method section is a blend of good technical descriptions about all of the like data and factors and components that are going to work in my research system and make it work. And then as also kind of part like writing kind of instructions in terms of like the protocol, right? Here's literally how I'm going to collect my data, organize my data, and kind of writing myself, right? Those commands. So really it's combining, right, those 2 underlying skills from our how to describe information and how to direct action units that build into how research projects can function. So you already know how to do this. Just know I'm just basically doing in-depth descriptions throughout my methods to prove that I have a real plan and can follow this real plan and have a clear idea of what I'm doing and how the system of my research works. Cool. And then the rest of it, goes into things like the deliverables, right? Loose timetable kind of stuff. And then any conclusions. Now, the next step was data collection, the doing the work itself. In my research, a primary source of qualitative data was the podcast transcripts and my field notes on the experience of engaging with these built communities around the podcasters. While my dissertation was more focused on the qualitative data, I still needed the added context of things like posting frequency, recording lengths, and some nominal categories for my content analysis. And finally, in the context of digital media like a podcast, I also collected social media engagement as another form of data, really blending qualitative and quantitative aspects. It was the things like the number of likes, shares, and comments on the podcaster's social media posts and individual episodes. So I'm going to show you behind the scenes with my field journals and code book for how I organize all this data. Right, yay! Field notes. Have a little, key reminders. Here's my questions that we talked about. Here's the layout, kind of giving myself almost like a little SOP legend of how to keep it organized and the different symbols. And then I just get into, my actual collection, taking all these kind of notes. Here's like an episode, and it really was me just listening and writing down according to my key everything that was happening, everything I was seeing. And so this kind of goes on for, literally pages and pages and pages as I'm kind of like going through this research process. That was kind of like step one of data collection happened in here as I was literally listening to it. Then I had to turn all of these physical notes into something that could be better tracked and managed. And that is where we then get into what we call the code book. So I just built it in Excel. My first tab has all the terms, definitions. Then I have my actual episode description. So this is just purely tracking. Title, episode description's easy. Then this was the actual kind of summary template and just like all this other stuff that I was tracking, which was outlined in the methods and justified and had all those reasons why. So my episode template, I kind of marked literally converting what I had written down in this notebook, just went through and basically transposed it all into this giant spreadsheet. That way I could, keep track of what was going on in every single episode and, just like all of those kind of elements. Oh, and then I just had a bunch more tabs of other things that I was trying to talk about and keep track of and just have available so that way I maybe could use it. This was the last big one for my Twitter kind of tracking. And so I actually had an API set up that pulled all of this information into a spreadsheet for me. And then I could just go through and do the actual sort of coding and like categorizing of that information that I was finding and, all that kind of data. And from there, I was able to put it into a bunch of these pivot tables, pivot chart kind of stuff, where I could start to, manipulate the data a lot more and, really see the different elements and links, and you can manipulate all of that pretty readily. So it was definitely a big undertaking, a lot to go through, live through, sit through, in combination with the written, and then kind of having this more data forward side. After all that data collection, we have to go through and analyze it for the story, the context, change or insight, and the resolutions that appear throughout the sample. I did analyze as I collected, which was part of the approach I selected. So really my final write-up and analysis was really me sitting with all of my notes and data to find those kind of bigger picture insights. Let's go ahead and look at that file. The final document is 270 pages, though remember that for my proposal, there's 130 there. So around a third of this draft was actually content revised and updated from that proposal stage, with then the rest being, fully written, brand new words on the page. Also, I do have graphics, technical visuals that we're going to scroll through. because this is, right, technical writing, right? It's not an essay. So we see, right, little excerpts of actual, transcripts that people said to clarify kind of the themes I was explaining. Right, lots of white space. We get, right, images. Don't forget to put things like captions so people know what it is that we are looking at kind of in the image. And honestly, I think these captions are a little bit weak. If I could go back, right, to my, again, younger, graduating self and be like, you should improve your captions. It could be stronger. I would give myself that feedback for sure. Yeah, I just kind of go on, right? I have summaries. I did color coding at one point to see the story, right? Putting in different types of charts to show, parts of a whole kind of distribution there. And it just goes on and on and on with so many kind of pieces of content and information. And then I also have all these appendices. So here's kind of just snips of that code book that we saw. Here's how I would color code things so you could visually see when ad breaks happened, how often they changed topics, jumped around. Right, I'm kind of talking about, right, this discourse map, a visualized pattern of the structure and predictable activity, that kind of stuff. And the final steps of a solid research project is the review process. So after many drafts and conversations with my advisor, I was cleared to send a draft over to my full committee and schedule that defense. You will actually watch a mini lecture of me reacting to my defense deck in a future module, so stay tuned. Now, similar to the proposal defense, my committee had time to read the document and then listen to a long presentation of my work. Then they asked me, challenging questions about my methods, finding insights and knowledge from the project to make sure I actually knew what I was talking about. After all that questioning, I received the pass and became Dr. Haley Blackburn.
Chaos is a ladder. Wow.
Well, technically after graduation, a month and a half later. But I did have some minor revisions to make because that is the point of a review and feedback. So the final document I'm going to show you is actually the letter I sent to my committee to confirm the changes I had made before I could send the final version to the graduate school. So a few things to notice about this. It's written as a business letter and not a memo, like your project retrospectives are written, because of the formality of the situation. But after that, I do a lot of things that you have all been practicing in your project completion reports. I'm explaining exactly how I met the expectations requested, I'm reflecting on the process, and I'm confirming that the work is done and what I learned from it. So, what does this example mean for you? Listen, if you go to graduate school, then the example's more obvious, and I loved my graduate school experience. But for the majority of you who are planning on going into industry right after undergrad, I want you to focus on the underlying process of formal research that can just be scaled back to fit your professional research, so projects on the job, situations. When you do user research, you'll gather both qualitative data, like interview feedback, and quantitative data, like task completion rates. Ultimately, being able to plan, execute, analyze, and then explain the process you follow in a cycle. And it's that cycle that I learned from formal research projects that I use anytime I approach work. From our house renovations, planning, executing, and reflecting to other less formal and work-related tasks. We explain the context and justify the research question or why our project's worth exploring, usually with a proposal. Then we set up our methods and document them and exactly what's happening so folks can validate and replicate the process. And finally, we provide the results in a discussion section to guide future work in that area. We also check in with our qualified peers and supervisors along the way for approval and feedback. And ultimately, we're trying to contribute something new, valuable, and action-focused for the field. So when you go ahead and read or listen to the full podcast lecture, think about that deeper explanation of these concepts and apply this example that we talked through today to your upcoming projects in this unit. Thanks, associates. Vibes. Started in this little tiny notebook where I literally was just jotting down any kind of little like idea just as I was taking classes. You know, this research project was forming, and I just took all these like itty bitty kind of notes that I carried with me all the time. Then once I got serious and actually was ready to start the research process is when I bought a brand new notebook specifically for this project. And right within that, oh man, what do I even have in here? Let's find out. Like this is the first time I've opened this notebook. Oh, right, here's my outline as I was preparing for the defense. And so you can see the whole outline of my entire project. I also wrote some little note cards to help me anticipate and have just a few little notes of like what I thought my committee would ask me. All right, so